Hello, my name is Maggie Lee, and I am the Records Management Officer for the New York City Department of Sanitation, or DSNY. And I also serve as the Director of Cultural and Educational Programs for the Sanitation Foundation, which is our official nonprofit partner. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Robin Nagle, who is DSNY's longtime Anthropologist-in-Residence, as well as a Professor of Anthropology and Environmental Studies at NYU. In 2013, she wrote the excellent ethnographic work, Picking Up, which is about her time studying DSNY, as well as the time that she spent actually becoming a sanitation worker and working alongside the men and women of our department. Something that she taught me, which I will paraphrase because I don't remember exactly how it goes, but that housework is invisible work. It's only seen when it is not done. And what Robin has taught me, and what she teaches all of us, is to see and appreciate the people and the labor and the systems that go into keeping our city and our world healthy, safe, and clean, which is work that as a society we tend to sort of intentionally not see. So I'm very happy to start this conversation with Robin, who I am very sort of honored to consider a mentor and a friend. How are you today, Robin?
I'm well, Maggie. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yeah, and I'm delighted to be here and to be able to have this conversation.
Excellent. Can you tell us about what led you to work with DSNY?
It's what I call the once upon a time story. I was 10 or 11 maybe, and my dad and I were camping in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. And it was an absolutely gorgeous day, and there was no sign of that humans had ever been in this forest. I mean, they had, of course, we were on a trail, but we got to our campsite, which was a lean-to looking over a gorgeous lake. But not far behind the lean-to was an open air garbage dump. It was maybe 40 feet square, and it had that signature stink of open garbage, something kind of citrusy and sour milky. And I remember there were balls of wadded up aluminum foil and a single sneaker. We were miles from any paved road. And I was looking at evidence of people who supposedly loved the wilderness. And I would then therefore assume that they liked environmental stewardship and being careful about how we treat the planet. And yet they had been unwilling to pack out what they packed in, which is just a basic ethic and etiquette rule of camping. You take out what you brought in. And I was looking at this pile and I was flabbergasted and absolutely enraged that they would desecrate this place with household trash. And my question in the moment was, who on earth did they think was going to clean up after them? And that question was a seed that was planted that day in that experience that I kept asking then as I grew up and then moved away from home and traveled a little bit. And anywhere I've ever been in the world, I look around and I say, who's cleaning up after me? Who's cleaning up after us? And when I settled in New York City and I was asking that question as I'm looking around, household waste is the responsibility of the municipal Department of Sanitation. So those big white trucks and the workforce in the green uniforms, they are cleaning up after me. And so the question then evolved to, who are they? What is it like to do that work? Why are we culturally so willing to ignore them? And worse, scorn them when their role in our city is fundamental to the public health of any town or municipality where a robust municipal solid waste management system is in place. In other words, we are profoundly dependent on those people and on that system. So why are they not honored more? Why are they not celebrated? Why do they not get the kind of kudos that other uniformed services regularly get? And that evolved into finally working with the department and then taking the job myself. So it's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but the roots of this go back to my childhood.
Can you talk a little bit more about how, once you started working with the department and doing your research as you were writing your book, can you talk a little bit about how your relationship to the people in the department changed over time?
When I started working with sanitation, and I make a distinction between working with sanitation, which was hanging out in garages and accompanying crews on their routes and talking to supervisors and superintendents and civilians. And I wanted to know the department in as much detail as possible. But when I went in, I assumed that the uniformed workforce carried a stigma that was a burden to them. That's not true. And it took me a little while to let go of my presumption coming in and to recognize that people doing the job care about doing it well, recognize that as employment goes, it's a plum job. The benefits are excellent. The union protection is strong. The history of the job is rich and dynamic. So my first lesson was letting go of my assumptions about how people on the job feel about the job. And then the great pleasure of working with sanitation, the deep privilege of it, is just coming to know people of all different backgrounds and ranks and job titles who care deeply about doing the job well, who understand the complexity, the dangers, which are pretty serious, the importance of the job, the camaraderie. I am jealous of the camaraderie. University life has nothing comparable. It's a little bit like soldiers in the trenches who form sometimes a very strong lifelong bond. The war on grime can foster the same kind of depth of friendship and bonds that transcend the job itself. And yeah, and one of the other things that surprises people, and I think folks think I'm being just sort of fluffy or just throwing superlatives around, but some of the smartest people I have ever had the privilege of knowing and working with happen to work for the New York City Department of Sanitation. And I teach and earn my living in a university setting. So I'm around a lot of people who think that they are very smart, and some of them are. But in sanitation, we the department have built over more than 130 years, one of the world's most sophisticated, effective, forward-looking solid waste management infrastructures that the planet has ever seen. It's not perfect, of course. I'm not blind to some of the problems, they're real, but it's a remarkable organization. And the people who make it hum, who make it go, it's the best part of my life, actually, my connection to sanitation.
I fully second the point that you make about every kind of person you will ever meet in the world is sort of here represented. And some of them are some of the smartest people that I know. And there's a sort of little quip that I hear a lot here at work where people are like, we're just picking up garbage. How complicated could it be? The joke being that it's very, very complicated.
Think about in a city of 8.4, 8.6 million, and that's just people who live here, never mind the commuters who are in and out. And the quantity and diversity of content and it's stunningly complex. And I think the public really has absolutely no idea about that complexity. And it's not just garbage, it's street cleaning and it's snow and it's emergency response, which the public really doesn't know. But just to say, oh, what's the big deal? It's just garbage. Yeah, well, dig in a little bit, no pun intended. And people, I think, can quickly learn that it's impressively intricate.
I will sort of paraphrase our commissioner, Ed Grayson, who was talking about snow response once. And he says that if you take the NYPD, for example, and you have an emergency situation where you get the call for shots fired, then, that precinct, whoever's local, they, rush to respond. But when we have a blizzard, it's every single corner of New York City, we rush to respond. across the whole city all at once and don't stop until it's done. And that's extraordinary to think about.
Another element of this comparison, when police or fire get a call, they have to react immediately. Sanitation is only effective if it's proactive. Snow is reactive. It has to be. We can't have plows on the street 12 months a year waiting for snow to fall. However, the garbage itself and street cleaning and all the ancillary responsibilities, we have to be on top of that all the time. Otherwise, it becomes an emergency situation pretty quickly and a health crisis pretty quickly. So when people talk about police and fire being first responders, yes, of course, we're pre-first responders. We're in front of challenges that would become public problems on a grand scale if we weren't doing our jobs well. So, and I think that's a really important point. Because we're out there every day preventing a public health crisis, and because we've done it pretty well for a while now, I mean, decades and decades, people take us for granted, and that's their privilege. And I'm not criticizing the public for doing that. It's one of the benefits of living in New York or in any city where this kind of work is done well. But think about if we weren't out there. Think about if the garbage had nowhere to go. We would be causing ourselves harm with our own discards very fast.
Can you say a little bit more? You mentioned being taken for granted. Can you say a little bit more about what you feel like the public perception of DSNY is?
Yeah, the public perception, I wish I could say I've seen it change in some structural way. We're not yet. The public perception of sanitation is, people still often use the word garbage man as a title for the job, which is an insulting anachronism. It's different titles in different cities, and here it's sanitation worker, which seems pretty straightforward and not a euphemism for something fancy. But there's an assumption that if you put on the uniform and you drive a truck and you fill it with, the trash that's on the curb, that suggests something about your character or your morality that is questionable, that you would only choose to do this job if you couldn't figure out something else to do with your life, and if you are consigning yourself to a sort of form of career failure, which is completely wrong. It's completely mistaken. But we have no educational or cultural intervention in those assumptions about, wait, let's consider what this role allows any city to do and be. We wouldn't be the glittering global capital that we imagine ourselves to be if sanitation weren't out there every day doing their job well. And again, I know there are problems. I'm not saying that the whole system is perfect or that every sanitation worker is a saint, but the public perception that the cliche among some workers who have actually heard this as children, well, if you don't do better in school, you're going to grow up to be a garbage man, implying some profound failure. It should be the other way around. It's like, if you're good enough, maybe, if you're lucky enough, maybe you can get this job that keeps New York alive, clean, safe, and healthy, yes, but more fundamentally, and here I'm referring to the work of Merl Latterman-Ukeles, the department's artist-in-residence since the early 1980s. That's her message. And it's a profoundly simple, but truthful message. Sanitation keeps New York City alive. If we could help the public understand that, I think it would begin to change the perception of the job. But for the most part, it's still considered a derogatory title to have, a job to hold. Which is just a shame. And that's one of the tragedies of this whole dynamic is the misunderstanding, the willingness to dismiss and think poorly of people who are doing work that makes our lives possible. It makes me kind of angry, actually, and I'm going to pull back a little because I'm going to start to rant, and that's not helpful.
This reminds me of when I have done tours. Occasionally, like people bring up, you say garbage man a lot, and I correct them generally. Because not only is there all of the sort of stigma attached to that idea, as Robin has described. My most simple response is just, they're women too, who work here.
Say that again.
Garbage women. I say they're women. It's not just garbage men. They're women in the department. So sanitation worker is obviously a gender neutral term. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the role of women in the department, and if there's anything you think worth noting about that.
So your question about public perception of the job, I think, ties into the fact that there are fewer women in the uniformed ranks than in police, and I think fewer than in fire, although I might be wrong about that. But the test for the job is pretty straightforward. If you can pass the written and then the physical test, the city has found you qualified to do the work. So whether you're, whatever gender you are, it's irrelevant to your ability to get the job done. But there, last I checked, and you might want to verify the statistic because it's a little bit out of date maybe, but fewer than 3% of the uniformed workers are at any rank are women. And I think that's a shame. I think they're better represented in many of the civilian titles, but going back to my point earlier about camaraderie and friendship and the bonds that you can form through doing this work side by side with your colleagues, why should women not have access to that as well? You know, never mind that it's the things that go along, the benefits and the union membership and the skills that you can get, especially if you are promoted and go into different titles over the course of your career. Again, it's not perfect, but women have been on the job since 1986 on the uniform side, on the civilian side for much longer, but on the uniform side since 1986. We were the last of the city's uniformed forces to admit women. And that was a good thing because Norman Steisel, who was commissioner at the time, watched and learned from police and fire as women were integrated into those ranks. And he saw things that they did that in hindsight made it harder for the women to become full members and be accepted. So he helped the sanitation transition to a co-ed workforce. It was smoother than it might have been had he not been kind of observing and taking lessons from police and fire who had gone before us. So, and we were, I also want to make clear, we were the last to admit women, not because of some kind of chauvinistic prejudice, but because of hiring freezes due to budget constraints. But Commissioner Steisel used that time well. And the women who were in the very early class of first few classes of new hires, it wasn't easy. They got the sorts of hazings and harassment that unfortunately you can expect when a uniform force opens up to women, but they've been on the job now for a long time. And I think the only people, I'm going to make a grand statement here, but I think the only people who feel that there's something wrong with that are old timers who are just not used to, still not used to the fact that, you know, the world has opened up and women, again, you can pass the test, you can do the job. What's the big deal?
You mentioned Merl a little bit before, and I assume that she was probably an inspiration for you when you kind of set up your relationship with the department. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I first encountered Merl when I was an undergraduate and was taking a class in public art. And she was one of our guest speakers. And I already knew I wanted to do, I was already obsessed with garbage and trash challenges and the work that is required to do that well. But meeting Merl was, it was astonishing to me that this woman could have immersed herself in the life of the department as deeply as she did, and then use that for a public facing series of works ongoing. I mean, this is more than 40 years that Merl's mission has been to help the public understand, appreciate, and celebrate the workforce. And especially this message of hers that I think is so important, that this is what keeps New York City alive. So meeting and hearing Merl was a catalyst for me to put aside doubts that, well, you know, here I am, this girl in New York City who's obsessed with trash. Well, that's weird. I'm going to put that down. Meeting Merl it taught me I didn't need to, not only did I not need to put it down, I could ignore the people who were telling me, this is a little kooky, what are you going to get serious about? And begin to pursue it. It wasn't immediate. By any means, it was many years later, but it was like the seed of the open air dump at the campsite that planted something that then grew. Meeting Merl was the next, that was the, I don't know, the fertilizer, the watering, she helped me have the courage to pursue my questions seriously, with her as the sort of, she had what's it called when you forge a path through unknown territory? She had done that. And that made it, meeting her made me realize it was possible for other people, other women to come in her wake. I'm not an artist. That's not my territory nor my claim, but yeah, she was profoundly influential to me. And I consider her a dear friend and a mentor and a kind of guiding light. We are remarkably lucky to have Merl in our ranks.
I would definitely agree with that statement. Hopefully,
she's
Merl.
Also,
say hi, Merl.
I would add, Meryl's also fierce. And when I have hit obstacles around my own research with sanitation, and I think to pull back, Merl is my model of like, no, figure out how to be a little more fierce to get what you're after. So that's another way in which she's a model for me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, actually, just speaking of Merl too, I have this thing written on my whiteboard that was from an excellent interview that she did, I think in the early 2000s. Sanitation is not garbage. It creates order out of chaos. And in that way, it is art-like. So I read that every day and I think it's beautiful.
And true.
Could you tell us, do you have a story perhaps that is representative of how remarkable the department is?
Well, the shortest, briefest one is sit and listen to our current commissioner talk about anything at all for 5 minutes or more, and you will be dazzled and amazed and just want to sit and listen to him all day. He's one of those people, when I was referring to the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life, he's on that list. And what's more amazing about Commissioner Grayson is you're fascinated when he's talking about things like the difference between salt crystals that are round versus salt crystals that are angular, and how they work in different ways in different snow conditions, and why you don't want the round ones because they get pushed off by the traffic. You want the angular, square, clunky ones. And I mean, little things like that. The depth of his knowledge and the enthusiasm with which he shares it, it's mesmerizing. So that's not so much a story as like, get thee to an audience with Commissioner Grayson and you will be much richer for it. In terms of stories on the job, there was a snowstorm in the Bronx when I was assigned to Bronx 6A. That's a broom garage, but they put everybody on snow. I don't really know the Bronx that well. We had done tandem plowing on the Bronx River Parkway earlier in the day, but I was now alone in my own plow, and I didn't know if the entire Bronx River Parkway was accessible to the trucks because there are height restrictions on some of the highways. For example, never drive a garbage truck on the FDR Drive. They just don't, because you're going to get those. You'll be in you have big problems if you do that. So I wanted to go back to the garage near the end of my shift, and I knew the quickest way was on the Bronx River. But would I jam the roof of the collection truck under was there a ton of an overpass? I didn't have the confidence to get there on the highway. So, all right, I'm going to take the surface streets, except that I didn't remember, I was lost basically. So, and kind of stressed, and I'm used to the truck a little bit, but I'm not completely, this is my first time plowing. And the vehicle itself as a truck has, you get used to the turning radius and the sense of the size of it as you're maneuvering it. But with the plow on the front, everything's different. It's bigger, it's longer, it's slower. The turning radius is different. to my astonishment, even with chains on the back tires, it slides in icy conditions. It fishtails. But okay, so I'm trying to get back to the garage. I'm kind of lost. I'm kind of stressed. And I'm near the Bronx Zoo. And I see what I think is just like a back entrance that's not gonna, if I just pull in there to catch my breath and consult my map and reorient myself, I'm gonna be fine. So I pull in to this back entrance that nobody uses, only to discover immediately that it's in fact the main entrance that everybody uses. And I've just blocked it completely. And a woman comes out from behind a booth and she's doing this, because I can't just pull in and stop and like catch my breath there. So I do what any reasonable brand new hire would do, which is I jump out of the truck to explain this to her. And while doing that, I burst into tears, like ugly crying, like, I'm a nuisance, I'm lost, I don't want to do. So now this poor woman, not only is the main entrance to her facility blocked, but she's got this kind of crazy woman in a sanitation uniform that's like, okay, how do we deal with this? So then she says, do you want me to guide you to back up? And I'm like, oh, no, a civilian can never do that. That's against the rule. No. So then, okay, she had a solution. I rejected her. All right. So I end up doing, I don't know, a 17-point turn to get the truck turned back around. And I'm still in that maneuver. I actually get myself off the macadam and I'm now on the grass, and it's been a wet, heavy snow. So the ground is soft. I shouldn't probably be saying this out loud or the Bronx Zoo is going to come after me. It was so many years ago though. But as I pull away, I look in my rear view mirror and I've left these gullies in the earth from my rear tires, and like gullies. So yeah, so that was an experience. I did get back to the garage eventually. I meant to go back to that entrance to the Bronx Zoo to apologize to that poor woman, but I didn't have the guts. So if she's listening to this out there somewhere in the world, I am so sorry.
Do you have any advice for women or any new people on the job?
One of the hardest things for new hires is helping their family understand the volatility of their schedule while they're very junior. They will bounce all over the clock, and they very often will not know what they're doing tomorrow until the end of the shift today. And it is mandatory, especially while you're still on probation. Let's say you're supposed to go to your daughter's six-year-old birthday party, and you find out you have to work instead. If you're a brand new hire and you're still on probation, you could ask for time off and maybe it would be given, but maybe it wouldn't. And if it's not, just put your head down and go to work. And family members, I think, often have a hard time understanding this is not the sanitation worker's choice. This is what the sanitation worker has to do to keep her job. And it surprises me how, again, this is about the public not understanding the dynamics of the work, that even family members have so little understanding of what is required that I hear stories of juniors getting a lot of pushback from family about, why weren't you at this graduation ceremony or this confirmation or this funeral even? Again, you can request and often get leaves, especially for if it's a death in the family, but you might not. And then it's your family who's going to be disappointed. So if there's a way to help families understand, especially in the beginning, that would go a long way toward relieving some of the stress that new hires face. I've been told, and I don't mean this, or maybe I do as a plug for the book, but I've been told that people who read my book get a better understanding of what new hires face and stop giving those new workers such a hard time about having to bounce all over the clock. You really have no control of your time when you are a new hire. The other thing is, it's the weight of the work is cumulatively much harder on your body than what you might expect. You will be lifting if you're assigned to a truck, and in some garages you won't be for a while because of seniority, but when you are, you will be lifting your share of anywhere from 8 or 9 tons on the lighter side to 20 tons in some districts. And if you're in a garage where it's lighter weight, you're going to probably be walking many more miles. So there's a physical toll, and I would counsel all new hires to be patient as their bodies adjust to the demands that you're now making on your back and your shoulders and your legs and your joints. Yeah, and if you go to a running district where people want to get done fast, be careful, because that's where injuries are more common. Again, especially as a new hire. At the same time, you don't want to push back against whatever is the culture of an individual garage. And each garage, when I was first working on the book, I thought, I'm going to do 59 chapters, and it's going to be 59 specific garages with each of their own. They all have house rules. They all have their own mini culture. But I realized if I structured it that way, I would finish the 59th and have to go back and start over, because it would take so long that everything would have changed by then. But yeah, so those are some pieces of advice for new hires.
Excellent. Speaking of your book, could you talk a little bit about the reception of your book when you published it?
To what audience?
Actually, I'd be curious to know sort of more a DSNY audience as well as the public.
It's been quite positive. There was one 3-star chief who's now retired, who told me that his brother read the book and called him up and said, "Is this what you do? This is your job? I never understood this. This is pretty important. I did not have any idea." He was a 3-star chief, right? And his brother is still like, "Whoa, that's really impressive." Okay. And anyway, I've also been told that senior guys will give the book to new hires that they're younger workers they're trying to sort of mentor, as a way of like, all right, here's what you need to know to get your feet under you faster than if you didn't read this book. So that's great. I would like to do an update. I mean, it did the hardcover came out now 9 years ago, and things change. I would love to add a chapter about Hurricane Sandy and our work in response to that. There's not much in there about September 11th. In fact, your work, the September 11th project that you have put into the world, is the first, and I think really will always be the hallmark of how to tell those stories and honor that effort in a way that those stories were not in the world before you did that work. So I give you huge kudos for that. Within the public, if you are at all interested in urban history or environmental issues or pollution generally, that tends to be the folks who read the book. Yeah, it's been good. The reviews were all strong. I will say, in the academic world, it doesn't exist, which is a little disappointing. I deliberately wanted a trade press instead of a university press because I wanted it to have a broader reach. No one on the academic side has celebrated, or the book party that I had for the launch was in the Manhattan 3 sanitation garage. And I invited some of my colleagues from NYU, who of course were like, "Whoa, this place is so cool." Whoa. But nobody at NYU has acknowledged that, oh yeah, Nagle wrote this kind of cool book. But that's okay. I didn't write it for an academic audience. I wrote it for the department and for the world.
I will say it's a pretty cool book. I think those are most of my questions. Is there anything else that you feel inspired to say?
So if someone picks up the book, like if they go out and buy the book, that's great. But then maybe you don't have a chance to read it, or it's on your shelf for a long time. Go to the glossary. There's 10 pages of sanitation slang in the back, and it will teach you how to talk to and about sanitation as if you know what you're talking about. I was on a boat in the Harlem River, right next to the Harlem Yards transfer station many summers ago. And I see the queue of collection trucks waiting to dump. And it was long enough that some of the guys had gotten out of the truck and had come down to the shore. And it happened to be a truck from Bronx 7. And I'm close enough to the shore in this boat that I say, hey, are you guys from the House of Pain? And which is the nickname of Bronx 7 because they regularly do 20 tons a day. And the guys on the shore were like, yeah, Bronx 7, yeah, House of Pain. Yeah. How do you know that? And it was not the moment to say, well, I wrote this book. I'm just, great going, guys. Watch your backs. Be careful. Not because someone's after you, but because the weight is so heavy. You know, like, take care. So you could startle your sanitation workers if you know some of the slang. The other thing I want to say to conclude our conversation, and I say this in almost when I give talks to the public or interviews, if anybody listening to this sees their sanitation workers, and here I mean municipal employees or privates, people working for the private carters, if you can, tell them thank you. They never get that. They deserve it. It's a small gesture, but sometimes it can really make a difference in that person's day. So that's what I would leave with.
Thank you so much, Robin. It has been a pleasure. I will mention 2 other things that viewers can go explore after this. If they want to check out discardstudies.com, Robin is the managing editor, I believe, of Discard Studies, which is sort of an academic hub of, thinking and writing about this topic. And as well, the DSNY Oral History Archive, DSNY Oral History Archive.org, I believe, which has a wonderful array of stories of people who were on the job. I was lucky enough to do one of the interviews myself a few years back. So those are some fun resources to check out if you are interested in this topic.
I would add, Maggie, that your interview in that collection is one of the very best. And when I teach the class that's organized around that, that's an assigned part of students have to listen to that early on as a model of, okay, here's how you do this well.
Thank you. I interviewed a man named Martin Bellew, so you can definitely find that one in the archive. And since we also mentioned as well, my digital exhibit that I'm very proud of, DSNYremembers.org, which is our digital exhibit about the work of DSNY during the 9/11 recovery effort.
That is a beautiful work, Maggie. That is a first-class, thorough, professional, comprehensive. It's quite moving and quite beautifully done.